This is the ROS Developers Podcast, episode 80.
The ROS Developers Podcast, the ROS Developers. The ROS Developers Podcast, the ROS Developers.
Hello, ROS developers, and welcome to the ROS Developers Podcast, the podcast that gives you insights from the experts about how to program your robots with ROS. And this is Ricardo from The Construct. And today I would like to dedicate this episode to all those ROS developers out there that are you fighting to make your ROS-based products more secure, so you can pass some certifications, you can ensure that nobody is going to hack your robots, and that you are going to offer an excellent robot for whatever is the functionality. So if you are one of those ROS developers, this episode is dedicated to you. And today we are going to talk about security in ROS, especially in ROS2. But before going into that, let me remind you about the Robot Ignite Academy. The Robot Ignite Academy is the academy that the Construct we have built to teach you how to do things with robots and with ROS. So we are teaching you from the basics of ROS1, ROS2, and then we move into more advanced subjects like manipulation, like navigation, and all that. Actually, recently we have started to introduce robotics courses that teaches you like the basics of kinematics, dynamics, control, Kalman filtering, and all that. Take a look at the academy. I think that you are going to find this very, very interesting and easy to learn those subjects. So now it's time that we go to the main subject of today. And for that, I would like to introduce you to Mikael Arguedas. He has been more than 3 years a ROS developer at Open Robotics, and he's one of the guys who actually makes ROS. So if you are wondering around there that, so I'm using this ROS, is so cool, so this is one of the guys who is making that so cool. So especially he has been in charge of developing the ROS2, mainly everything concerned about making ROS2 more secure. That's why we are going to talk with him today here. At present, though, he is working at a company that is called Neofarm. Again, I pronounced it wrongly, sorry. Neofarm, because it's French. Okay, so that's the small difference. And Neofarm is very curious because it's a company devoted to produce better results in agriculture. So welcome to the podcast, Mikael.
Thanks, Ricardo, for having me. Hi, everyone. I've been working on ROS for a long time, and I'm happy to work on agricultural robots today to make our robots and our agriculture better for the environment.
Yeah. So and now you mentioned that, what is this company about Neofarm? What is that about? What they are producing?
Basically, they're producing vegetables. But the main goal is to make small farms next to big cities. And so right now around Paris, and in a model that is based on permaculture. So basically, instead of having one big field with a lot of with the same culture for hectares, you have a small area with a lot of different culture living with each other, so that the plants can basically help each other. And this is something that is very hard to make profitable because it takes a lot of manual labor. And so now what we're trying to do is to build tools to make the life of these farmers easier and make that model profitable.
Okay. And for that, are you using robots for that specifically?
Yeah, we're building robots for that.
Okay. Amazing. And the official question is, are they running ROS inside?
Yes, obviously.
Great. That's great. Okay. So one final question about that. I know that it's not on the scope of what today, but can we buy those robots? Or
No, right now, so we are a very small startup. We are less than 10 people today. And the robots we're developing are like just a tool in our overall like farm architecture. So our main goal is to like create a farm model with like all the research in agronomy, all the tools and the robots. And the main goal is to develop these farms. So we're not going to sell only a robot because that fits in the bigger ecosystem of like how you cultivate and how like your infrastructure is set up and everything. So we won't sell robots, but we'll like open more and more farms that are based on that model. And maybe franchise that model of farms later on, but not sell individual robots.
Yeah, specific. Okay, I see. So that's your business model. Okay, and selling the robot is not. Okay,
Exactly.
Great. So best of luck. So I know how difficult it is for startups, and especially here in Europe, it's not the same as in the States. So best of luck, and I hope that I will interview you again in a few months with talking specifically about your company and what you are doing with your robots there. I hope.
Sure.
Okay.
With pleasure.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about the main subject of today, which is about the security in ROS, right? And as you know, when people is asking, what's the difference between ROS1 and ROS2? And then you say, you can do that, you can do this. And so, and one of the points is, but ROS2 is more secure. So in which sense is ROS2 more secure than ROS1?
Well, so in itself, like ROS2 is not more secure, it's just more, you can more easily secure a ROS system.
Okay, that's
and so basically one of the main differences is that like in ROS1, there was a lot of like custom codes and like some pretty rigid APIs, and security was not taken into account when designing all the APIs of ROS CPP, the ROS master, all these very low level components that everyone relies on. And so then there were a lot of efforts to several independent efforts to bring security to ROS1. And that's been very difficult because basically allowing people to add security was breaking API of every publisher, every subscriber, whatever. And so in the end, that never made it into the main ROS packages because it was like too disruptive. And so the idea when designing ROS2 was to keep that in mind so that like all the API and the structure of the code allowed for plugging security features on top. So the answer is that like today ROS2 is not more secure than ROS1 by default.
Okay.
If you create your regular publisher or whatever, but you can much more easily and without writing code make it secure.
Okay, makes perfect sense, right? Okay, so finally I have understood this point because I was also selling, oh yeah, ROS2 is more secure and so on, but I was thinking, I don't know, because I don't know actually anything about security of ROS yet. So, but I think that you have sold me to start looking into that and the SROS. So, but let's not go so fast into the meat of the podcast. So, then at present, so can you tell us, or more or less, schematics or some ideas about how can somebody hack our ROS2 based robot? If it's by default, installation of ROS2.
Well, it's basically very similar to how you can hack a ROS1 robot.
Okay.
So if you go on a ROS1 network and you can, where the master is, and you can talk to the master, then you can basically register nodes and start publishing whatever you want, listening to whatever you want. And so no security, basically, as long as you can access that network. And in ROS2, it's, like there is no master, but the concept is the same. If you can access a ROS2 network, if you can basically say on which DDS domain you are, and you can join a DDS domain where the ROS2 nodes are running, you can then also register a node on that domain and publish, subscribe, or like exactly as in ROS1.
Control the robot.
So yeah, you can hack a ROS2 robot that's not using the security features the same way or almost the same way as a ROS1 robot.
Okay, now makes sense. So actually for the ROS1, it was very, very easy because we built this robot here. You can see here that is that one over there, and we created that for a coffee shop. And it was moving around, but it was attached to the Wi-Fi of the shop, and where all the clients were connecting there, and for using the Wi-Fi normally. So fortunately there was nobody there knowing about ROS, and they were just amazed about the robot, but the possibility was there. Just make a scan of the ports that are available, detect where is the ROS core, and then go for that and make the robot bring the drinks to you, from another client. Okay, and then so we have this problem also in ROS2. Even it's a little bit more hidden because it's in the DDS layer, which is a little bit lower. But how can we protect our robot? What is this thing called DDS Security?
Yeah, so DDS is the middleware, like the default middleware used for ROS2. So that's basically also a difference from ROS1, where in ROS1, so there was this like middleware stack that was built in ROS and maintained in ROS. And for ROS2, the idea was to get something more robust, industry proven, and that didn't have to be maintained by the main ROS developers, but instead take something that has been developed by experts and tested for years. And so the choice was on DDS because it brings you it's for distributed system, everything that we like to do with ROS. And so DDS is like a specification. It's a standard, and then several people implement middleware based on that standard. So you have several implementations, and they all have differences, but that's the idea. Mm-hmm. And then the DDS specification also has a lot of extensions. So you have a lot of other DDS specifications that are to add, to define how to write XML files to configure a DDS system, how to bridge DDS communication to another protocol like OPC UA. And there is one for how to bring security to a DDS system. And so there is a specification called DDS Security, which defines how people providing DDS implementation, if they want to claim to be security compatible, what they have to do.
Okay. And so that's the DDS, what we call DDS Security. And you mentioned actually it was not you, it was, what's this name of this guy who is also working with you on the SROS? Is
Rafin?
Not Rafin, the guy from Ubuntu.
Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle, exactly. So I read a post about DDS and security in ROS2, and he mentioned about 5 levels or 5 plugins, but only 3 are the key ones. Let's say, can you explain us a little bit about that?
So the idea is that there are many aspects in security, and so the DDS security specification focuses only on network security because DDS is a communication protocol. Yeah. And so it focuses only on how to secure in communication. And then they define basically 5 plugins that handle different parts of security. Okay. And so 3 of them are mandatory. So if a DDS vendor says we are compatible with DDS security, they have to implement these 3 plugins. Okay. And then there are 2 more that are optional. And so some vendors implement it, some of them don't. It depends. Okay. And so the 3 main plugins, the mandatory ones, the first one is authentication. That's basically the first step for anything. It's basically a way for any DDS participant. So we can simplify that as any ROS process has to be able, when it's trying to connect to the network and other ROS nodes, it has to be able to prove, basically show its ID card. Just say, I'm a person, you can identify me. And so now that I introduced myself, we can validate that I'm allowed to be part of this conversation. And so I'm joining the network and I can talk with you on other nodes. So that's the very first step to secure the system, is to at least know who is there trying to speak or to listen to the topics. Okay.
Just a second. One question about that is, then that means that I would not be able, if that was implemented in the coffee robot, then I would mean that not everybody with a laptop and connected to the Wi-Fi could create a node to publish speeds into the robot. So this node
So people basically could create nodes, but these nodes would not be part of your ROS network.
Exactly. Okay. And how do they authentify? So what's the process? What do you need? So it's a password. Is a username and a password, or?
No, so basically, how it works is that you have a key, and it's a pretty classic actually internet technology. So it's a way of like exchanging keys.
Okay.
So each participant has a private key, and there is like a certificate authority that says I signed that key. So basically, I have my ID card, and there is a stamp from the government on it saying like that's a real ID card, and I like vouch that this person is Mikael.
Great.
And so basically then what the node do is like they show that to each other. They're like, okay, I have this authorization. This is me. And then they have like their private keys that they will be able to use for multiple operations that we will talk about later more in the,
Yes.
a bit more in the weeds. But so that's basically what the authentication plugin defines. So it defines basically all the plugins define specific functions and APIs that the plugin should expose, so that you can easily either implement another one if you want to choose another method to do something. And also, like ideally, you could just swap plugins and without having to like recompile, you just use another plugin, link against that one, and that's it.
Okay.
So that's for authentication.
Exactly, for authentication.
I guess the second one is cryptography. So this part will like take care of the actual like ciphering, the real like security thing for the messages. So this will take care of how to provide functions, how to sign messages, how to encrypt messages. And so then all the things needed to be able to decode messages based on like your key information. So the messages have been encrypted for you. So you're the only person that's able to decrypt them. And so all these parts, which is like heavy cryptographic, like operations. And then that's the same. Like this, you could decide to use like different libraries, different hardware to like store your keys or to perform these operations. Because these are heavy operations, so they can take like quite some resources on your system.
Exactly, because you had to do this encryption and then de-encryption in order to get all the data, and this can affect, for example, the real-time processor control loop that you are having there, for example, unless you have a big computer.
Exactly, or dedicated hardware.
Or dedicated hardware.
Like sometimes you have like hardware that's made for that, and
exactly.
And so then, like, I think where it gets more interesting, so like with authentication and cryptography, you can basically define which nodes are allowed to connect,
okay,
and how they can like protect their messages from people like reading them or modifying them. And so that's good, but it still doesn't put that much constraint on your system. So basically, if you have like a camera driver that someone successfully hacked,
okay.
This camera driver is allowed to listen to messages, is allowed to publish messages, it can encrypt messages. And so nothing prevents that camera driver from sending a command velocity message, like a message on the command velocity topic, and move your robot, when it's obviously not the role of a camera driver. And so that's where the access control plugin comes in. And the main thing is to be able to specify which resources a given like participant, a given node can access on the network. And that allows you to have like the much like finer grain like security, which is just like being able to say, okay, this part of the system is allowed to do this and only this. And so even if this gets compromised, it cannot impact the rest of the system. And that's something very important in security, is to be able to like separate concerns and like make sure that things are allowed to do, like are doing only what they're allowed to do.
Okay. Now it makes sense. So now we are going to skip the other two plugins because are related to login and so on. So it's not so related to our compromising the coffee robot there and getting the concept. But now it's very clear. I didn't understand very well about the access control, but now that you have explained here, it's very, very clear for me. Great. And then the next question is, so now we have understood what is a secured ROS2 system robot. Then what about the default or all the DDS implementations that we are using normally in ROS2 at present? So do they implement those layers, those plugins, those plugins?
So at present, like there are 3 like officially supported DDS implementations in ROS2, and all of them implement these 3 plugins. So you can use DDS Security with the 3, each of them.
Okay, but then So then when we download and install ROS2 from the repo, it's already running in a secure mode already.
No, so you get, so it also depends. So basically, out of these 3 implementations, 2 of them are open source, and when you download the ROS package, you already have like the security libraries with it.
Okay.
In the case of the closed source one, sometimes you need a license or like something specific to get these extra features. But that, even if you have the libraries installed, it doesn't mean that like when you create a node, the plugins are instantiated and active. And so when you do your development or your play with ROS2, by default, security is not enabled.
Okay.
Because this adds a lot of constraints, especially in your development when you want to be able to spawn nodes at any time and like create new topics and remap topics and everything. If you had to maintain a list of like, oh, now this node is allowed to do that, let me restart it, it would be a pain to use. So by default, no.
Okay.
But then we're trying to make it easy so that once you have a system that like you know how it's supposed to work, what like the graph of your system, all the nodes you will have will be, that you can easily then like enable security for those.
Okay, now it makes sense. Oh, perfect sense. So I'm understanding the whole process. That's so great. And then what is SROS2 then? Because if all those things are coming already with the default ROS2 installation, so what is the package or set of packages SROS2?
Yeah, so SROS2 is a pretty like loosely defined thing in a sense that like originally we're talking about SROS for security features in ROS, and so we could SROS2 security features in ROS2.
Okay.
But in the end, like most of the security capabilities in ROS2 are within the DDS implementation. And the goal of ROS2 is to be able to provide the right interfaces so that we can use them. And like that's basically it. So then we created packages to make using them easier. And so what the SROS2 packages do is basically define command line tools to be able to like generate all these security materials, how to generate certificates and keys and specific XML and signed XML files that the DDS plugins will need to perform.
Okay. So actually there are tools. There are tools for helping. Okay. But because the security is already implemented by the DDS vendors that we are using inside maybe the default ones like Fast RTPS or Cyclone or Open Splice or all those, they already have implemented. But then if we are interested on using putting security in our robot, then we'll have to use SROS2 in order to simplify our work and our life as developers.
Exactly. Like you won't have to use them, but like I would not recommend trying to do it by hand. And so and basically what SROS2 will provide as well is like so it will give you all these files that you will need to provide the DDS plugins.
Okay.
And then it also defines like a set of variables that you will need to set up in your ROS system to be able to tell the lower layers like RCL and RMW, okay, do I want to enable security for this node? Do I want to, like, where should I look for the certificate or these kind of things? And this is what ROS2 uses to tell DDS, okay, instantiate a cryptography plugin with this configuration.
Okay, now makes perfect sense. So then you are modifying or providing another ROS2 CLI, or adding actually to the ROS2 CLI, adding all those commands so that we can then afterward use them, like the ROS CD. Okay, so we have ROS CD, and then it automatically brings us to the package directory, wherever. So you have us create all those tools inside the SROS2 package to help us.
Yeah, and actually, it's extending the ROS2 CLI. So all the ROS2 commands, instead of being like ROS topic or like it's ROS2 space a verb that is topic. So if you want to echo a topic, it's ROS2 space topic space echo, whatever. And so for security, basically SROS2, it just comes to add more functionality to the ROS2 command line tool.
Okay.
And so then if you have SROS2 installed, which everyone should by default. You get ROS2 space security and a bunch of options and commands you can use. And so that's the SROS2 package. And then there is like another one that is like a bit less used, but it's like SROS2 CMake, which basically allows you to directly define, like get CMake to generate those so that you don't have to type the command line. You can just say, okay, here is the configuration of my system. And so you just give a list of nodes, a list of like, I don't know, paths to file to explain which node can do what. And then if you just do colcon build, when this package CMake is run, it will generate all these files for you and everything.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's great. That's great and very clear. So I'm amazed of the explanation that you are providing, really, because I try to understand about this security ROS. Okay, I didn't put all the effort, but I have tried several times to read some articles and so on. I never get my mind clear about how it works, and now I understand all the steps. That's awesome. That's awesome. And
we need to do more documentation as well.
Yeah.
I guess that's the point associated with that.
Typical. That's typical. Yeah. And then let me see about my questions. So yes, okay. So yeah, so you mentioned about the benefits, and then also I don't know if I have to ask you this question. So this question is, so if the security capabilities of ROS2 are so good, then why don't we have them installed by default? So you mentioned a couple of the drawbacks, which one is the resource consumption, that we have to take into account that in one way or another with special hardware or whatever. So we don't care about that. And the second one that you mentioned is that is making the development a little bit more tricky in the early stages. So any other drawback that you can think, or can we leave like that?
I think these are the two main ones. Then I think we should emphasize that like people should not wait until last minute before production to turn it on. Because as you said, when you're doing robots that have control loops or anything, and you have to think a bit of like what deserves what level of security. Like ciphering, like doing encryption is a very resource intensive, and there are some messages that maybe it's not that big of a leak of information if it's not encrypted. You want to be sure that the message has not been modified, or like you want to be sure it comes from the right node.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't really matter if someone can read what's in the message. And so there is also like a bit of reflection to be had on like, okay, in my application, what is important? Well, if I have like images with people to protect their privacy, maybe this should be encrypted, but maybe like the message sending the command to my robot. Well, we're not going to be able, maybe you're going to be able to imagine where the robot will land after the command, but it's not that big of a leak of information. So this one, you don't want to lose time encrypting this one because you want to send a lot of control messages. But maybe you want to sign this message to say, okay, for sure, I'm the one sending you and I'm sending you that command, and so you can move there safely.
Okay. Yeah, so we basically what you are telling is first that don't make like we are doing always, is like so we design the product, so we create the product, and then afterwards we think about the purpose of the product, or the marketing of the product, or the case, the cover of the product, and then when it's done, we try to fit it. So the same thing applies for security. Don't wait until that time. That's one. And then the other one is that you mentioned is that so we have to think about those security tools, so layers. So we have to think about what we really need, right? So don't go with everything and then that's it, but think about it in a clever way of that.
Exactly. And just one more thing I wanted to point out is like, you get all the security tools installed by default. Then it's like, it's up to you to enable them on your system. But when you install like ROS Core, you get SROS2, you get the default RMW implementation with the security plugins. Like everything is installed on your system. Then it's just a matter of like defining environment variables and like enabling it.
Okay, great. Great. Then can you tell us about mixed systems in which there are ROS1 and ROS2 nodes in the same robot or the same application? Because I think that this is going to be very common in the close future as we are migrating our robots from ROS1 to ROS2. We cannot migrate everything at the same time. Then we are using bridges and so on. So what do you think in terms of security of that case? Are we completely fucked or can...
Well, it really depends. Like the thing is that so in ROS1 you have some options, but none of them that allow you to specify like exactly what nodes can do or anything. But you can still like protect your network. You can like put everything behind a VPN. You can like there are some options to like at least limit, or like what you said, like, oh, I can look for that port and find the ROS master. Well, maybe you don't have to run your ROS master on that port.
Exactly.
And so on the ROS1 side, there are a few things you can do, but you can still like not really protect yourself. What you can do though is that on the ROS2 side, you can define exactly what the bridge between ROS1 and ROS2 can do.
Okay.
And so at that point, you're going to say, okay, that bridge is only allowed to send these type of messages on these topics. And like, you cannot just come send TFs or whatever around and mess up with my thinking of what the robot is doing. So you can still kind of protect the ROS2 side, but it's harder than if you had a full ROS2 system, because you can't control what comes from like the ROS1 side. You can just like put a gate and say, okay, let's filter before it comes in.
Okay, but then, as I understand from what you say, both systems, ROS1 and ROS2, they are separated entities in terms of security, so they cannot, in some way, even if we use the ROS1 bridge, this communication, so it's broken at the place where both connect, right? So the security.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, they are two completely separated network and communicating differently, and the only interface is that ROS1 bridge that makes a link between the two. Okay,
clear that. Then can you tell us who is behind the development of SROS2? So we know that you are one of those, and we talk about Kyle and Rufus also. Can you tell us a little bit about these people?
Yeah, so how it started is that like originally security in ROS was a project started with like by Morgan Quigley that started the ROS project, and Ruffin was like working with Morgan to start developing SROS, so security for ROS1. And then when we started the development of ROS2, I looked into doing an equivalent of SROS, but for ROS2. And so I started implementing SROS2. And after a while, when it's...
Sorry? When you were at the Open Robotics, right?
Yeah. And then so Ruffin was like, oh, like, let's work together on that, because that's a topic he has a lot of interest in. And so he brought his expertise and help to the project. And so we've been like the main two developers, I guess, of that part of the system. And later on, with the TSC being created and more like companies being interested in security, we had some contribution from folks at AWS, Amazon Robotics, that helped like bring things forward and also study things outside of the scope of SROS2. So SROS2 was really focused on like providing ways to like configure Dds Security. But security is wider than just like network security. You can have like many other parts of your system. And so they've been working on like defining threat models, how to like define all the vector of attacks possible for your robot, and what impacts it has on your choice of hardware, of system architecture, and other things. So things outside of the SROS2 project per se, but in security. And then like the folks at Canonical, I've been joining the working group, and they actually like dedicated quite some resources and been producing great work to improve SROS2, add features, and so today I would say that like Ruffin, me, and the Canonical folks are the main like contributors and maintainers to that project. And there are a few cool things coming up as well to make the project like more easy to use. The folks at Canonical started working into an integration so that you can do ROS launch -- secure, and it will audit your launch file and all the nodes that will be run and generate all the things for them to be able to use security, so that you don't have to configure yourself, generate files or anything. And that gives you an idea of like how your system would perform if you were to use security.
Okay.
So that's a cool thing coming up. We have a few other tools in flight. If you have a running system, running a node to basically audit, like listen to everything on the network and give you a map of like, okay, this, when your system is running normally, you have all these nodes and all these connections from this node to this node and everything.
Wow.
And so if you want to secure it, you need all these rules and generate like files for all these rules. So yeah, there is development.
Wow, yeah, I
going on
can
and cool
see.
stuff coming.
That's amazing. And for all the ROS developers listeners of the podcast, remember that you hear this first here in the podcast. Okay, so remember that's a news, an interesting news. Okay, so then also you say that then you answer the question about the current status and so on. And then just one question related to your last answer. So all those features are released as a new ROS2 version distribution is going to be released, or is for Foxy?
I think the goal will be to put them in rolling, and they will make it into Galactic, mostly because it's we try hard to not break API in existing distros, and these changes will change some API in launch, some API in SROS2, and so we're targeting them at Galactic.
Okay. Great. So
but I'm not promising they will be in Galactic. I mean, we're working on them, but we're all working on them on the side, so I can never promise a delivery date.
Okay, of course, we understand, because now this is a side project from your current work at Neofarm. So then that means that so you have the time that you have for that, and the others the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of the folks are Canonical are doing that like as part of their work, but that's far from being their only work thing to do.
Yeah, okay. I understand. And now, by curiosity, so then back when you were at Open Robotics, then you were working full time on that subject, for example, or whatever the development of ROS2, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think people at Open Robotics are never full time on a specific topic, and so. But I had definitely time on like work hours to develop SROS2. But aside from that, I was also developing, I don't know, all the Python message generation and the RCL Pi thing, or maintaining a lot of ROS1 packages, and like maintainers at Open Robotics have a lot of work outside of the specific features they're working on. So I would never say one of them is full-time on something.
Okay. I understand. Okay. Just by curiosity, because for us, who are the people who are using ROS for so many years already, and then we see Open Robotics like, wow, that's super cool. The guys of Open Robotics are, the ones that are creating this that we are doing. So just curiosity about how you work there. And then final question then, because we have been jumping on the different questions and you have already answered. So any specific operating system that is required in order to have the SROS2 packages tools working, especially the tools, because I understand that the Dds Security doesn't matter because it depends on the vendor, if the vendor has Dds Security for Windows or Mac or so on. But what about your packages, your tools?
No, all the tools are compatible with every tier 1 platform. So like macOS, Windows, Ubuntu. Then one thing that like the security working group, which I guess that's something I didn't talk a lot about, but all the work around security, not only SROS2, but also all these things on the side, like threat models and like other tooling and security consideration for your systems. There are people doing that, and it's called the ROS2 Security Working Group. Okay. And so basically, all these guys have been developing things, and if you want to secure a system outside of specific network security, specific just DDS security, then the tools you're going to use are going to be different based on your operating system. How you restrict access of processes to resources will be different on Windows or Linux. And so I guess the main conclusion is that security is a thing as a whole, and SROS2 and Dds Security focus only on the one part that's compatible to all operating system, which is the communication protocol. But there are many other aspects of security in your entire system, and some of them will be OS specific.
Okay. Wow, very clear wrap up and summary of the security aspects of a ROS robot and what is the role of SROS2 in that area, in the whole security part. Wow, amazing presentation and explanation. So let me tell you that I will put some links about what you have been mentioning, especially about the security group link. So I will put it on the show notes of the podcast, so everybody that is listening, they can find it and figure out more information, and we give credit to all those people that are doing a very excellent job for making robots more secure. So that's...
If anyone is interested in security,
sure.
All the meetings are open. You can join the security working group meetings and just to listen in or to suggest some ideas. And everything we do is open source. So if you go on the SROS2 repo or anything else, just if you want to contribute, if you have issues, just feel free. It's GitHub and everything is open. So
wow. So please, ROS developers listening there, if your interest is about security, I think, I don't know what you think, Mikael, about the security in robots, because so far we didn't care, actually, everything. But what do you think about the future of that? Do you think that it's going to be something very, very important, like it's happening, from many years ago with computers, and that it's a critical issue, for example, for companies and for governments about having secure computers. So what do you think about security of robotics?
I'm really hoping it's going to go a bit faster than for computers. But yeah, Industry 4.0, Internet of Things and robotics are domains that develop technology very, very quickly. And most of the people working in these domains are focused on look at all these amazing features I can bring into your life or to your company. And very few of them think of security. And that's something that can have tremendous repercussions. A lot of people have been deploying robots in hospitals during the coronavirus crisis. And you don't want this robot to be messed with. It can really be a life or death situation. So
yeah.
So I want to give credit to all the people in the robotics community that try to push this security forward. One group I didn't mention yet is Alias Robotics. Alias Robotics has been doing a lot of work on that front. And so if you're looking for security, contact some of these people or get involved in the working group, and because your robots will need to be secure at some point. Otherwise, there can be problems.
Yeah, okay. So I completely agree on that. And the example that you mentioned about the coronavirus robots that they are putting, that's very, very clear, because it's true. They are, beside the patients, the people that is ill, and so any break on the security can perform something very, very dangerous. Very, very good point. And also that you mentioned Alias Robotics, which is a Spanish company here from Spain, and it's been ruled by David and Victor Mayoral. So, hello, guys. Here, my salutation to you. I hope that you are doing fine. So we'll talk on the next ROSCon, guys. So, yeah, very nice guys, because I know them, and I have been meeting them several times on the ROSCons and so on. Okay, so that's all for today, Mikael. So thank you very much for being here and for all the answers. It was super clear explanation, at least from my point of view, really. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and thanks everyone for listening and thinking of security.
Great. And now, let me finish the podcast just by reminding you that we would like to reach another record in the podcast by having 105 stars in the podcast, especially in Apple Podcasts. So I will really thank you to all the listeners if you can share with your audience, if you can vote for us or give us 5 stars on iTunes or Stitchers or even Spotify. There. So please go there, vote for us, and see you on the next podcast episode with another expert. And until then, keep pushing your ROS learning.